Hello, everyone. Welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is your host, Valerie. Pleased and delighted to be with you here today. And today I'm going to do something that I do very seldom, but sometimes when I feel really, really strongly about something, I just do it. Before I tell you what I'm going to do precisely, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory, some context. Nathan and I are in the process of creating an episode here on this podcast where we dig just a tiny bit deeper into the LDS Church and the underreporting of child abuse. You can probably tell that I care a ton about this. I feel very, very strongly about this as a mental health worker. And one of the things I've been kind of curious about and then sort of started studying up on it and then started talking to Nathan about it. And then next thing you know, we're like on a long car drive. And now that we live in Southern California and the LA area, guess what? This is so exciting, at least for me. I have so many more opportunities to talk to Nathan about books that I read and even to read books to him. So we were doing this thing and I just started sort of coming together with an outline that talks about the 5 patterns that are visible, or that at least are visible to me, that can be sort of seen and observed that explain why abuse is mishandled and underreported in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because I want to make better sense of what's going on, how something can be so seemingly obvious to someone from a different perspective and so sort of invisible to the institution itself. And as you know, I do this because I care about the health and well-being of all parties, of the people that are certainly the victims, first and foremost, but I even care about the church and those who are part of this struggle from the side of the perpetrator, that I want everyone involved, all my sisters and brothers, to have the fullest understanding of this phenomenon so that it doesn't keep happening. The only way that institutional reform happens is by our making sense of it. If we can't make sense of it, then it continues to sort of operate in the dark, or operate in the shadows. And I care a lot about people that are actively being harmed. And so to that end, I wanted to really look at the structure of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that make it vulnerable to this very problem of not seeing, or of not being willing to see child abuse, and or underreporting it, mishandling it. I mean, there's so many different ways to talk about this, but it's happening all the time. And I want to just sort of break it down. So that's not even today's episode. That's next episode. So as I was planning this, I was reminded of an article that I read actually quite recently. It was published in the Dialogue Journal. And I was just going to link it and sort of reference it. And this is the part where I said at the very beginning, I sometimes do this when I feel really strongly about something. I'm going to go ahead and actually read this article to you. I think I have a pretty good narrator's voice, but it's profound. It's actually quite provocative. It speaks quite strongly about violence against women and girls in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my thought process was, number one, I don't know how many people are going to find it and read it. So if I reference it, there might be a handful of you out there that will. And then also there is like a voice option if you go onto Dialogue Journal, but I do think it's like an AI generated sort of thing. And I mean, I might not be the greatest reader in town, but I'm probably better than an AI generated voice. So I'm going to go ahead and just read this to you. You will notice that there's a section in the article where the author talks about her own life story. I am going to put that in second person. I'm going to talk about her instead of me, just because I don't want any of what is said to be lifted out of context and have people misunderstand that this is not my story. This is the story of the author of this article who's writing it. The article's title is Confronting Men's Violence Against Women and Girls in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The author is somebody who I have profound respect for. I do not know her personally, but I read this article. I've actually listened to it. Let's just say I've partaken of it many times now and shared it with many, many people. I feel that strongly about it. So Shout out to Suzanne E. Greco. I hope I said her last name correctly. So just take a listen to this. And then this is sort of the lead up to the episode that Nathan and I are going to be discussing in the next Monday episode. And you will notice that much of what I had already been thinking about and preparing is actually very much a bridge and is discussed in this article as well. Before I do start, let me see if I can, hold on, I want to actually, a quick second. I want to do a tiny bio of her, give you a little sense of who she is. Suzanne E. Greco holds a Bachelor's of Science in Economics from BYU, MTS from Harvard Divinity School, and is a PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh Divinity School. As a survivor of child clergy sex abuse and domestic violence, she is the author of The Stone Sphere, is a member of the SRVI Faith and GBV Practice Working Groups, and an impact team member for Utah State University's Boulder Way Forward. Okay, love the bio. I don't know what all those acronyms mean, but I think her work will speak for herself when you hear what I'm about ready to read. Here we go. I will be talking, stopping briefly from time to time and getting a drink because I don't have a conversation partner. It's all me today. So here we go. Confronting Men's Violence Against Women and Girls in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Suzanne E. Greco. An undercurrent of violence against women and girls exists in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church professes commitment to support victims of sexual abuse and its declared policy of zero tolerance, which mirrors the position of numerous religious organizations. These sentiments, while suitable for formal declarations, websites, and public addresses, stand in contrast to the church's actions, which are not aligned with its professed Christian tenets. The church, in actuality, fails to encourage members to report abuse to legal authorities and does not train its leaders in appropriate response protocols. This article urges the church to address the existing dissonance and align its actions with the policies it has formally established and its Christian doctrines and practices. As Bell Hooks poignantly articulates, the impact of patriarchy, manifested as male domination over women and children, constitutes a considerable obstacle to the experience of love. Patriarchy does not align with Christ's construct of divine love. Violence against women and girls stands as a pervasive violation of human rights on a global scale, unfolding relentlessly each day in myriad manifestations. Defined by the United Nations, violence against women and girls is any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering of women, including threats of such act, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life, close quote. The repercussions of such brutality are profound, casting shadows of short-term and enduring physical, financial, and emotional toll upon women and girls. The enormity of its impact in the lives of individuals, family units, and communities defies quantification. In secular and religious contexts, women or girls seeking protection from such harm find themselves caught in a patriarchal vortex of androcentric laws and policies and male leaders. I employ the term, quote, vortex to describe the victim's experience ensnared in a system that not only gaslights them, but also subjects them to a violent, chaotic, and perilous environment. Within this tumultuous swirl, individuals find themselves disoriented and powerless, struggling to navigate a reality fraught with fear and unpredictability, where their capacity to influence their circumstances is profoundly limited. Victims who dare to speak the reality of their situations will be sucked into the vortex, equivalent to an act of suicide or a cutting off of social and familial ties. Judith Herman, a leader in child sex abuse, asserts that the impact of the violence extends beyond the actions of perpetrators to bystanders and institutional enablers who perpetuate the social ecology of violence that is tolerated or rendered invisible. I'm going to read that again just a little bit more clearly. Judith Herman, a leader in child sex abuse, asserts that the impact of the violence extends beyond the actions of perpetrators to bystanders and institutional enablers who perpetuate a social ecology of violence that is tolerated or rendered invisible. This article delineates three major areas of reform. First, it advocates for legal changes in clergy penitent laws. Second, it advocates for women's ministries, that female leaders minister to women and girls who experience violence against women and girls, not male ecclesiastical leaders. Empowering women and girls through female-to-female alliances overcomes the patriarchal vortexes and redresses power differentials, thereby facilitating access to essential support mechanisms. Third, it underscores the imperative for comprehensive education and training initiatives on ministerial and community levels. Specialized training is required for ministers to effectively provide counseling to both survivors and perpetrators. Training is also essential to identifying victim-perpetrator dynamics and behaviors. Community-level educational initiatives must encompass discussions on credibility issues and consent as a fundamental human right in intimate relationships. These measures are crucial in efforts to prevent violence against women and girls. This section is called Unveiling My Journey, a Personal Tale. Her journey to initiate structural and policy changes within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints commenced as a response to having been caught in the system. Her life began in toxic circumstances, subjected to child abuse by both her father, who was a former bishop, state presidency counselor, high counselor, and current active member of the church, and by her grandfather at a very young age. Struggling to stay afloat in the face of the relentless abuse and enduring the deep physical and emotional wounds, she observed daily others gliding by seamlessly untouched by her turmoil. After college and admission, a friend of her father's, 9 years older than herself, was introduced and they were married. They had 3 children, and when her parents moved a good distance away and she began to feel safe, the unconscious buried rubble surfaced. Child sex abuse, amnesia, a common symptom, eventually fades away, only to be relived again until the toxic waste is integrated. As systems surfaced and love and support were needed, her husband's behaviors turned abusive, and a darker side revealed itself. A cycle of abuse, the cycle of abuse continued. Amid the ensuing chaos, one of the children jumped ship, leading to the ultimate fracture of their family. She faced the daunting task of keeping her other 2 children afloat, all the while her then husband continued to abuse. In these circumstances, she was understandably desperate. She was joined in her fight to find a way out over a decade ago by her newly ordained stake president, David F. Holland. Many words of encouragement and blessings were offered, serving as beacons of hope amid the turmoil of her dire circumstances. Regrettably, President Holland's hands were tied at times, bound by protocol that constrained his ability to intervene due to the system and the policies of the church. Amid the bustling activities and responsibilities that demand attention for those living in comfort, church leaders often remain mere bystanders. The institution becomes an enabler. Despite Holland's urgent pleas for her then husband to cease his violence, he was indifferent to these entreaties. The realization sank in that no external intervention would come to her rescue. Overwhelmed by the physical and emotional toll of the ordeal, she wanted to just let go. Her will to persevere waned in the wake of nursing deep wounds, trying to care for her children, and the continued abuse. Both body and spirit were shattered. The weight of the suffering was unbearable, overshadowed by a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. When she initially made her disclosure to her priesthood leaders, she was met with unbelief because her abusers were respected men in the church community. I'm going to, as an aside, remember this was her own father and grandfather. back to the reading. She was stigmatized and labeled mentally ill by her community and by both of her perpetrators, who painted a very different picture by manipulating and controlling the narrative. According to Sarah Ullman, victims experience harmful reactions from both social networks and formal support sources in patriarchal societies. Due to all of this, she found it imperative to distance herself from her ward community to safeguard both her mental well-being and her spiritual convictions. It was only when another courageous victim disclosed that her experiences were, it was only when another courageous victim disclosed that her experiences were acknowledged with the gravity that they deserved. Holland took charge and assumed a proactive stance. He engaged a seasoned professional to conduct training for leaders, enlightening on the task of ministering to both victims and perpetrators and addressing the lacunae present in the church instructional materials. In order to be taken seriously, she had to achieve incredible levels of credibility. It was not only her acceptance at Harvard and studying violence against girls and women in a religious context, her involvement with the United Nations and her audience with Pope Francis for the inaugural and subsequent events for the World Day for the Prevention of and the Healing of Child Sexual Exploitation, Abuse, and Violence, that her assertions were finally given serious consideration within her own community. The fact that these credentials had made her more powerful, thus credible, speaks directly to the nature of the social dynamics and credibility issues. These prominent external affirmations served to dispel the unfounded notions of her supposed false allegations and her mental craziness, instead illuminating the authenticity of her testimony regarding the harrowing reality of what had been done to her. Female voices are simply not believed when it comes to violence against girls and women. Any woman or girl who comes forward about violence against girls and women put their own life and reputation at risk, not the perpetrators. Throughout those advocacy endeavors and openness about her past, she has had many conversations with the survivors of abuse and has come to more fully understand that the struggle for validation and the desire to have their injuries ministered to is a shared experience among women and girls who have endured similar traumas in our church communities. Yet trauma is not only inflicted by the actual perpetrators, but also by ecclesiastical leaders, institutional enablers, and their respective church communities due to no educational training on violence against girls and women. Amos Guerrero, an Israeli-American professor of law specializing in institutional complicity, enabling culture, and sexual assault, refers to this phenomenon as, quote, the armies of enablers, close quote. Jeffrey C. Alexander, a sociology professor at Yale University, asserts that traumas are socially constructed through interactions, cultural norms, and beliefs. This points to the fact that trauma extends beyond the individual experience and is deeply intertwined within a broader social environment. Her experience reflects broader truths. Institutional religious organizations function in dual roles in relation to violence against girls and women. They possess the capacity to serve as both a shield against and a conduit for the perpetuation of harm. Religious convictions have the potential to foster psychological resilience and to facilitate healing, and have the capacity to promote programs and structures that combat violence against girls and women. Conversely, patriarchal structures with power imbalances, sexism, androcentric ideologies, and theoretical constructs within religious institutions perpetuate violence against women and girls. I want to read that again. Religious convictions have the potential to foster psychological resilience and facilitate healing, and have the capacity to promote programs and structures that combat violence against women and girls. Conversely, patriarchal structures with power imbalances, sexism, androcentric ideologies, and theoretical constructs within religious institutions perpetuate violence against women and girls. While the beneficial aspects of the religious affiliations are widely recognized, she aims to illustrate the the less favorable realities inherent in the LDS Church's centralized, patriarchal, and hierarchical organizational structure and policies. In this sphere, the imperative emerges regarding the roles the church, its leaders, and its communities have in addressing violence against girls and women. Eventually, she made it out with her children. Now, here she is, advocating as a survivor, standing in solidarity with other survivors of domestic and child sex abuse, and with male allies to initiate much-needed change. Her belief is that Christ supports women and girls. He has supported her, and he wants change. Here's the next section. It's titled Faith Under Fire, Confronting Violence Against Women and Girls in Religious Communities. These problems are not unique to Latter-day Saints, but reflect a global issue. According to the United Nations, sexual and gender violence is a global problem and a preventable pandemic. In a study encompassing 161 countries, UN Women found that 45% of women reported that they or a woman they knew had experienced violence against girls and women. 7 in 10 women said that they think that verbal and physical abuse by partners has become more common. And 6 in 10 felt that sexual harassment in public spaces has worsened. Additionally, UN Women found that less than 40% of women who experience violence seek help in any kind. Among women who do seek help, most of them look to family and friends, and very few look to formal institutes such as police and health services. Fewer than 10% of those seeking help report it to the police. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women have been subjected to some form of violence by an intimate partner or non-partner or both. Most crucially, these forms of violence most commonly occur in the home. The World Health Organization has stated that women are at greater risk of harm in intimate relationships than elsewhere. Quote, challenging quote, I'm going to start that whole thing over. The World Health Organization has stated that women are at greater risk of harm in intimate relationships than elsewhere. Quote, challenging the notion that home is a safe haven, close quote. Also, according to Childlight, a global child safety institution at the University of Edinburgh, 11% of men in the US, 7% of men in the UK, and 7.5% of men in Australia report that they have engaged in online behaviors at some point in their lifetimes that could be classified as online child sexual abuse offending. The culture of violence against women and girls is a global pandemic. There are several challenges that we have to face when seeking to understand the extent of the problem as it affects Latter-day Saints. There are no actual statistics, task force, or training about sex, consent, and gender-based violence within the LDS Church. What we find instead is a system constructed to protect the interests of the church at the expense of victims due to existing policies, closed-door access, and lack of accountability mechanisms. The fact that we do not know how extensive violence against women and girls actually is within the church points directly to its doctrine, its culture, and patriarchy. In other words, without proper oversight, there is no opportunity to shine light on those places and to expose root causality. To be clear, this is a structural and doctrinal problem framed in patriarchy and maintained by church theological tenets, embedded in teachings, practices, and rituals, which actively produce and negotiate inequitable power relations among men and women. I want to repeat that again. To be clear, this is a structural and doctrinal problem framed in patriarchy, maintained by church theological tenets, embedded in teachings, practices, and rituals, which actively produce and negotiate inequitable power relations among men and women. According to Catherine Bell, quote, systems such as ritual both realize and regulate the structure of social relations. Like forms of speech, forms of rituals are, quote, transmitters of culture, which are generated in social relations and which by their selections and emphasis exercise a constraining effect on social behavior, close quote. Rituals should not be understood solely as mechanisms of social control. Rather, they represent one of many strategies employed to reproduce and manipulate the foundational cultural structures of a community. These structures are not merely abstract concepts, but are experienced, embodied, and perpetuated by individuals within the society. Theological tenets embedded in LDS church rituals cultivate a distinctive dynamic in social relations, particularly in the inculcation of beliefs. According to Bell, such practices are intrinsic to the very production and negotiation of power relations within a society. And the androcentric, rather than Christocentric positionality of the church, coupled with its misogynistic policies of women, cultivates an unhealthy ecosystem for all members of the church community, men, women, and children alike. There may be some sources that indicate the extent of the problem as they affect Latter-day Saints. They reveal significant risks to Latter-day Saint women and girls. In Utah, 61% of the population identify as members of the church. Utah statistics are rough estimates used to illuminate violence against women and girls among Latter-day Saints, but they do not explicitly provide an inside view of what is actually happening in the LDS church. That being acknowledged, the data provide a mere glimpse of the situations at hand. In Utah, sexual violence is being committed by male perpetrators whom the victim knows, and more horrifically, quote, many victims of sexual assault and sexual violence in Utah are children, and they are victimized by a family member, close quote. Statistics show that rape occurs in Utah at a rate higher than the national average. In 2022, the reported rape rate in Utah was 59.5 per 100,000. The national average is 40. Allow me to repeat that because that's significant. In 2022, the reported rape rate in Utah was 59.5 per 100,000. The national rate is 40. Rape is the only violent crime for which Utah's rate is higher than that of the national average, and this has been the case for the past 25 years. For all other types of violent crimes, Utah's rates are lower. Yet according to the Utah Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, only 11.8% of women actually report crimes of sexual violence to law enforcement in Utah. This means that 88.2% are not being reported, compared with the national average of 63%. These findings indicated that acts of sexual violence are substantially underreported and that the investigation and prosecution of these crimes are not being pursued. While the church contributes to the lack of clear information about the frequency of violence against girls and women by not collecting on reporting data, there are other barriers as well. Part of the reason that women and girls do not often report their abuse is that they generally must report it to men. Female credibility issues are embedded in patriarchal ideologies and misogynistic policing. Male-to-male alliances appear to be at the heart of the underreporting, underinvestigating, and underprosecuting. Moreover, ministers who lack training in the nuances of consent frequently misinterpret reports of sexual violence disclosed by women. They may mistakenly perceive these reports as violations of church doctrine, leading to an inappropriate focus on punitive measures rather than understanding the situation's complexities. Women and girls in the church appear to be in graver danger due to a deeply ingrained and embedded sexist culture positioned within the patriarchal church structure, culture, and doctrines. One of the structural issues that contributes to the perpetuation of violence against girls and women is the process by which victims seek help from the church. Male ecclesiastical leaders currently are first responders for women and girls seeking to report and receive help in most religious institutions. I'm going to read that again. I don't feel like I said that clearly. Male ecclesiastical leaders currently are first responders for women and girls seeking to report and receive help in most religious institutions. This is in line with standard LDS church procedures. Current guidelines specify that women or girls in abusive situations are directed to seek assistance from their bishop or stake president. In many instances, the male ecclesiastical leaders, as such, is in a position to act however he sees fit. This usually is done through church guidelines, inspiration, and the lens of his personal worldview. In the current regulations, the male ecclesiastical leader is also instructed to call the church's helpline, established to guide and protect ecclesiastical leaders and the institution, to facilitate how the leader should proceed. Furthermore, the church's call center primarily serves the institution itself as its primary client, rather than prioritizing the needs of the victim. If the call center were truly oriented toward the victims, individuals in need would have the ability to reach out directly for the assistance and legal counsel they require. Unfortunately, this is not the case. This realm of personal discretion for men leads to wide discrepancies. Church leaders may or may not communicate victims' rights within the church and legal or civic realm to the abused. How the leader shares knowledge received from the helpline with the victims is entirely at his discretion. Church leaders often do not communicate with the victims about church sanctions against the abuser or their legal rights. Victims seeking care are then often placed in precarious situations wherein their well-being is jeopardized. These current conditions are not necessarily surprising. Even though men see and hear injustices done against women, many avoid getting involved and confronting injustice. As James Newman Poling has observed, quote, "Silence shares complicity in acts of sexual violence," close quote. These acts of collusion are devastating to women and girl victims. Also, in discussions had with females seeking assistance, ecclesiastical leaders often protect one another by referring to, quote, "inspired counsel," close quote, or saying, quote, "I am sure the ecclesiastical leader did not mean that," close quote, or "the counsel was positioned on revelation received," close quote. The female's sanity, her own intuitions, and her received revelation is often questioned, juxtaposed against a prominent leader's counsel. Let me repeat that. The female's sanity, her own intuitions, and her received revelation is often questioned, juxtaposed against the prominent leader's counsel. This institutional gaslighting further entrenches the victim in psychological darkness. There is no easy solution to this problem, but there are some helpful directions available. Ullman's recent book called "Talking About Sexual Assault: Society's Response to Survivors" emphasizes the significance of transforming societal attitudes through sexual assault education. Ullman asserts that while altering perceptions and attitudes is pivotal in the fight against violence against women and girls, a more fundamental shift involves reforming the structures and conditions that foster the prevailing culture. It is imperative to not only educate, but also challenge the social norms that perpetuate sexual violence against women and girls and unfairly assign blame to victims. Combating the entrenched culture of violence against women and girls through structural reform and education, in providing support to the victimized in everyday situations, are essential components of this multifaceted approach. Solution number one, legal changes. An April 2022 General Conference talk given by Elder Patrick Kieran addressed the church and sexual abuse. He said this: "We must deploy everything we can to help those who have been mistreated in the most dreadful ways." I think I need to say that again. I didn't say that clearly. "We must deploy everything we can to help those who have been mistreated in the most dreadful ways and help them heal," close quote. While the church has not lived up to this promise, there are areas where it may improve. The first major area for reform that we might seek to address are the ways that clergy penitent laws have been contributing to violence against girls and women by not involving secular legal authorities. The record books show that male ecclesiastical leaders in the church have refrained from acting in the best interest of abuse victims. One of the main reasons is that clergy penitent law and other legal liabilities cause complications for the institution and those ministering in ordained leadership positions. and clergy penitent privilege has the unintended consequence of enabling harm in cases of child abuse. Recent cases have revealed the significant problems that these laws have created. In the highly publicized August of 2022 Associated Press report by Michael Rezenes, a bishop in the LDS Church did not report child sex abuse to secular authorities. He did this on the Council of the Church's hotline as advised by Curtin McConkie Law Firm, the largest law firm in Utah, which has long served as the LDS Church's external legal counsel. The sex abuse continued for over 7 years while church leaders were fully aware that it was ongoing and no protections were put in place for the victim. All parties involved, the bishop, the church helpline, and Curtin McConkie Law Firm, enabled the perpetrator. This case exposed significant weaknesses in the church's approach to treating sexual violence in ways that extended beyond the individuals involved. The extensive investigative work conducted by Rezenes and Jason Dearden regarding the legal maneuvers revealed how the church acted to stifle rather than to support victims. In December of 2023, audio recordings captured church leaders protecting the church against a child sex abuse claim and discussing payments to silence the victim. These audio recordings from meetings held over 4 months, obtained by the Associated Press, shed light on the conduct of Paul Riding, the director of risk management at the LDS Church. Despite expressing concern over child sex abuse that had occurred, Riding deployed a risk management strategy that had enabled the church to maintain secrecy concerning cases of child sex abuse. This included church legal counsel advising against the bishop providing testimony in the victim's case by advocating clergy penitent laws. Consequently, in the absence of his testimony, prosecutors opted to dismiss the charges. More telling is that Riding verbally conveyed that he was authorized to pay up to $300,000 to the victim and her mother for their silence, governed by a confidentiality agreement. Silencing victims is institutional betrayal and further traumatizes victims. Confidentiality agreements have the potential to inflict additional harm by impeding the public disclosure and broader societal recognition of victims' experiences, while also serving as a shield for wrongdoers. These protective measures creates an environment conducive to perpetrators acting with impunity, secure in the knowledge that their actions will be safeguarded from scrutiny. By insulating wrongdoers from the repercussions of their actions, such agreements erode the efficacy of social mechanisms designed to reinforce accountability and instigate behavioral changes. By offering silencing agreements, religious institutions' actions mirror the behaviors of the perpetrators in silencing and shaming victims, thus obstructing paths to healing. While contemplating the unfathomable nature of these atrocities may be distressing, it is imperative to recognize that clergy penitent privilege laws persist in jurisdictions worldwide. In a hopeful turn of events in February of 2024, the legislative bodies of the Utah Senate and House of Representatives jointly approved a bill that bestows upon clergy members equivalent legal safeguards as other mandated reporters of child abuse. This legislation pertains specifically to situations where instances of abuse are disclosed during a religious confession by a perpetrator. Additionally, the bill seeks to educate clergy by delineating the distinctions between adherence to church policies and legal obligations. Proponents assert that the bill serves an instructive purpose, clarifying to clergy that they can safely report abuse from a confessional. While this proposal seems promising, Guerra suggests more extensive legislation. He advocates for the removal of child sex abuse from the confines of clergy privilege, proposing that any confession made must be reported in all instances, regardless of circumstances. Passing this bill and supporting others that are more aggressive will help change the legal landscape for victims and end the ecclesiastical shield for perpetrators. Solution number 2, women's ministry. As noted above, the current procedure of the church is that victims of violence speak to their male bishop or stake president. Church leaders play a vital role in this process. Allie Kern, a survivor of domestic violence, stated in an article in Reflection, a Yale Divinity School journal, that, quote, survivors most often reveal their experience of abuse first and often only to their pastor. This puts pastor in the place of first responders, close quote. Kern's statement is affirmed by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and Religious Scholars, such as Nancy Nassen-Clark and Janet Heimlich. Yet ministers, for the most part, are not trained to understand how to shape their pastoral care to respond effectively to violence against women and girls. As men are more likely to be ministers, women reach out to men for help and protection against other men, and this is precariously known as, quote, the male protection racket, unquote. Women are promised protection from men though none is actually provided. Let me start that over again. Women are promised protection from men, though none is actually provided, as men are often predisposed to protect their peers. When women then find themselves entrenched in the patriarchal vortex, and the cycles of subjugation and harm continue. Compounding these problems is a culture of doubt about women's claims of abuse. When the abused can vocalize the reality of an abusive situation, her testimony will often be incredulous because she is a female. I propose shifting the responsibility to women church leaders to overcome such barriers. Male-to-male alliances will no longer stand in the way as a barricade to credibility issues and to seeking needed assistance from men when being abused by a man. Granting women this authority should also improve the victim's access to much-needed help and resources, not only for herself, but also for any children involved. Additionally, alliances forged among females may offer more protection and support to women, given that the majority of violence against women and girls is committed by men. This has been exemplified in the work of Diana Rosenfeld, a founding director of Gender Violence Program and a lecturer on law at the Harvard Law School. Without systemic change, the prevailing social environment and entrenched rape culture will persist unabated. Solution number 3, training, ministering, and raising awareness. Finally, comprehensive education and training initiatives on ministerial and community levels are vital. Specialized training is required for ministers to effectively provide counseling to both survivors and perpetrators. Training is also essential in identifying victim-perpetrator dynamics and behaviors. Community-level educational initiatives must encompass discussions on credibility issues and consent as a fundamental human right in intimate relationships. These measures are crucial in an effort to prevent violence against women and girls. Lack of educational training represents a broad cultural shortcoming. Formal training of ministers in addressing violence against women and girls is notably absent, not only in higher education institutions such as divinity schools that offer formation programs for chaplains globally, but also within religious organizations. The LDS Church is no exception. It is imperative that training and education on this matter address victim-perpetrator dynamics, which are tied to credibility issues foremost. In many cultural contexts, disbelief and skepticism, In many cultural contexts, disbelief and skepticism are deep-seated biases against female survivors who courageously share their stories with male ministers. Abusers exploit these biases. In addition, a perpetrator will frequently seek to manipulate both private and public accusations against them by casting aspersions on the mental health of the woman or the girl. This is known as coercive control. Jennifer Freed, Professor Emeritus of Psychology and founder and president of the Center of Institutional Courage, describes coercive control, sometimes called DARVO, as, quote, the reaction of the perpetrators of wrongdoing, particularly sexual offenders, may display in response to being held accountable for their behavior. DARVO stands for deny, attack, or reverse victim and offender. Allow me to repeat. DARVO stands for deny, attack, or reverse victim and offender, close quote. The perpetrator or offender may deny the behavior, attack the individual doing the confronting, and reverse the roles of victim and offender such that the perpetrator assumes the victim role and turns the true victim or the whistleblower into the alleged offender. An initial stride towards countering DARVO involves education. Merely acquiring knowledge about Darvo can serve to diminish its potency. In instances where perpetrators employ Darvo, individuals well-versed in these tactics are inclined to lend credence to victims while harboring skepticism towards perpetrators. This knowledge also proves efficacious for victims themselves, being less prone to internalize self-doubt. The act of identifying and labeling Darvo can wield significant influence as a potent antidote. There is also a great deal of inconsistency in the way that church leaders handle these cases. Seeking help from ecclesiastical leaders may be compared to purchasing a lottery ticket. An ecclesiastical leader usually provides counsel and will act based on the church's position as well as his own personal worldview. Preconditioned perspectives are often positioned in lived experience, in which the leader will in turn position their prescribed counsel. Such counsel is often centered on androcentric perspectives and church ideologies that are not easily broken free from and can often impede validation and credibility, the procurement of safety for the female and the female's ability to acquire the information and knowledge regarding her rights, hindering her ability to make best judgments and decisions. When sexual abuse is such a ubiquitous and ever-present problem and leaves not only physical and psychological injuries, but deeply spiritual and moral wounds as well, why then, we must ask, are ecclesiastical leaders not being trained in how to minister to victims and perpetrators? How can untrained ministers act effectively without perpetrating additional harm when dealing with such difficult and complex issues? Abuse survivors are confronted with the spiritual and psychological issues of dealing with their relationship with Christ and God as both males and the two faces of the church. Let me say that again. Abuse survivors are confronted with the spiritual and psychological issues of dealing with their relationships with Christ and God as both are males and with the two faces of the church. For example, perpetrators are often upheld in callings and leadership positions despite testimonials provided against them. Perpetrators freely move from one ward to another and across state boundaries without their histories being passed on, and women and girls are often left wondering how God's church allows such injustices. This is a systemic institutional problem that facilitates moral injuries. Moral injury is the damage done to one's conscience when experiencing an act that transgresses one's moral beliefs, values, or ethical code of conduct. Other churches have begun to address these issues by recognizing the problems. In 2023, the University of Notre Dame's McGrath Institute produced a white paper initiating a formation program in pastoral ministering to victim survivors of sexual abuse. Quote, today as the church, we are called to minister to a world in which sexual trauma of one sort or another is commonplace. Formation programs must reflect this reality, close quote. That was from Notre Dame. In other words, this is a call for a sea change. Might we consider strongly gleaning from those who have walked through the fire? As imperative as it is for the institutional church to train ecclesiastical leaders in how to minister to moral injuries and identify victim-perpetrator behaviors in violence against women and girls, drastic changes are also needed to bring conscious awareness to the community level as well. The lack of institutional involvement to enable more conscious social awareness on these issues perpetuates stigmatization and biases and keeps the reality of our collective and individual lived experiences in darkness. Both victims and those encircling them in shared communities must embrace our lived realities of harm being done in our very homes by the men in our own church communities as an initial step towards preventing the further demise of women and girls. Listening to the stories of abuse can itself have a transformative effect. Conscious awareness raising can expedite healing and reorient flawed worldviews of stigmatization. In the words of Howard Zehr, an American criminologist and pioneer in the modern concept of restorative justice, this is a quote, "In addition to restitution and answers, victims need opportunities to express and validate their emotions, their anger, their fear, their pain. Even though such feelings may be hard for us to hear and may not square with what we wish them to feel, these feelings are natural human responses to the violation of crime. Anger, in fact, needs to be recognized as a common stage of suffering and one that cannot simply be short-circuited. The suffering and pain are part of the offense and need to be experienced to be heard. They need to have their truth heard and validated by others, close quote. Here, Zare speaks clearly to both parties bearing the pain of the sexual crime committed and the parties in the posture of vulnerability. Conscious awareness can only be rendered in the open daylight, not behind closed doors. According to A.W. Sipes, a psychotherapist and expert in clerical sexual abuse, quote, power depends on keeping certain realities private. The thrust of spirituality propels itself in exactly the opposite direction, towards exposure of truth and complete self-revelation and total accountability, close quote. Consciousness is pivotal to healing. If we as survivors are heroic enough to share, why is it then that others are not heroic enough to hear or to bear the burdens of the crimes forced upon us by the very institution and men whom women and girls have supported? How long will our families, communities, and society allow, foster, enable, and promote such acts of sexual violence? Additionally, consent in any intimate partner relationship is both a human right and not fully understood. Just because one may be married, it does not mean they have the right to demand or coerce sex from their partner. Human rights treaties such as the European Convention on Human Rights and the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women include the guarantee of freedom from sexual violence, coercion, and discrimination, as well as control over one's own body and over the involvement in sexual interactions with an intimate partner. Education on consent is essential in the LDS Church's patriarchal context. She closes on a hopeful note. In working with Teddy Hickman Maynard, Associate Dean of the Ministry Schools at Harvard Divinity School, he has committed to integrating mandatory education on sexual abuse into the curriculum beginning in the fall of 2024 and to pursue curriculum development for a course focused solely on this pressing issue. Dean Teddy is leading out, working to reimagine a formation curriculum that will include violence against women and girls training. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints needs to do the same. Violence against women and girls is a plague that is actively alive, harming our own women, girls, families, and our community. There exists a patriarchal vortex that facilitates violence against girls and women, both structurally in the institution and in church ideologies, enabling pernicious harms to perpetuate. Religion plays a twofold role in both facilitating healing and perpetuating harm. Legal issues such as clergy penitent laws, credibility issues, and male-to-male alliances are key components of the patriarchal vortex in which abused women and girls find themselves trapped. Shifting the role of ministering to women and girls who experience violence against girls and women to women leaders is one means of addressing such hurdles. Additionally, ministers and communities are uneducated and untrained in violence against women and girls. This must change. Conscious awareness, bringing to light the reality of violence against women and girls in our higher education institutions, religious organizations, and in our own communities must be openly addressed. It is essential to adopt a multifaceted approach that encompasses not only the provision of education, but also the reformation of the systems and policies that perpetuate violence against girls and women within the patriarchal vortex. Okay, I got through it without too many tears. I hope this, maybe you need to listen to this a few times like I needed to. It's very, very dense with phenomenal research and profound truths. So I'm going to close because my voice is almost gone. Look forward to talking to Nathan about some of the structural issues that perpetuate this patriarchal vortex. And my hope and prayer to all of you out there listening is that we can be raising awareness, one conversation at a time, one podcast episode at a time, one book at a time, one social media post at a time, that we can strengthen ourselves and that we can protect our women and girls. And then we can create a setting where women, men, and children are all safe and are all invited to psychologically and spiritually and relationally grow, because that's what we're here to do. I wouldn't talk about this if I didn't care so much about my people, about you, about those of you who are suffering in silence. And I don't regret anything that has happened to me or to my family in an effort to be a voice of change, because that voice that I give is one of love and healing. Thanks, y'all, for being here. Thank you for sharing this. Thank you so much, Suzanne Greco, for the dialogue institution. I don't know, my mind is kind of mushy right now, to the Dialogue Journal of Mormon Thought for publishing such bold and brave work. And I feel honored that I am a collaborator with the Dialogue organization. They are truly on the leading edge of growth and development here in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thanks for being here, y'all, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. Your support for this podcast is extremely valuable to us. If Valerie's work has made an impact in your life, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review. For info on webinars, classes, support groups, and live events, click the link in today's show notes or visit our website at latterdaystruggles.com. Latter-day Struggles is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcasting Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.